So I think I'm somewhere between you and the trailing part of the session, and I'm not sure. So firstly, I must apologize for being a few minutes late. Had some meetings I was late out of. So today I think we're talking about sustainable supply chains, which obviously is a topic which is an interesting one to talk about, something which is close to us at MLL, and something which I'm personally quite passionate about. So let's just start off with, I think, why sustainability is important. I think all of you probably know this, that obviously the recent Paris climate agreement has set a target to limit greenhouse warming to 1.5 degrees. Over 1,000 businesses, including the Mahindra group at large, we have signed up to adhere to achieve zero emissions by 2050. And obviously the transportation sector, especially logistics, is one of the largest challenges in getting there, right? And we represent a very significant problem and a growing problem, because transport emissions could go up by around 60% if we do nothing from today by 2050. So unfortunately, this is one problem which increasing consumption, increasing globalization is only going to make it worse. And a large part of that problem is around road surface transportation, which is the lion's share both in terms of specific emissions intensity as well as in terms of sheer volume of load which is carried on by road. Obviously, the India dilemma is very significant because we are trying to figure out how to provide affordable access, right, with the lowest carbon footprint. So it is what I call the macro to micro challenge, right, which happens across the board. Everybody gets it at one level. I think we all inherently want to be good people. We want to do the right thing. But as you get down to the brass tacks, it becomes a lot harder, right? A couple of years ago, we actually did a survey with the CII Institute of Logistics on close to around 500 large companies in India and their leadership in terms of what they felt was the importance of sustainability to their supply chains and their businesses. And this is just coming out of COVID. So a very large and interesting thing. Obviously, a lot of companies, as you can see there, two big questions we asked them. What's their commitment to the journey of decarbonization? A large part of them, of course, were very, very strong and vocal in that commitment. More than half the companies actually said that they had taken very specific targets as a company to be net positive between 2030 and 2050. So those are articulated goals and objectives. As you know, the Indian Stock Exchange requirement around BRSR requires you now to start reporting it out. So it is an regulatory imperative in India, in Europe, and many other geographies. And probably the goals reflect that broader imperative which companies have. At the same time, I think a lot of companies really articulated the largest problem being the inability to establish clear baselines, right? What gets measured gets done, and a very large number of companies essentially said, listen, when it comes to logistics especially, we don't know how to really perfectly measure this. Of course, a lot of it is scope 3, and therefore it probably allows you to kind of defer the problem in some ways, but it is something which most companies actually talked about, right? So it is the large challenge of saying, how do I take a very macro thing, which we all agree to, right? There's a goodness in all of us. All companies want to essentially say that we want to do the right things, and then we kind of drill it down to a micro set of actions. You are just kind of keep hitting a set of stumbling blocks. And therefore, I think most companies, at least I know in our sector, have essentially probably indulged in a little bit of what I think is the industry lingo is greenwashing, right? Where many of us are essentially just saying that let's not change anything, probably we'll just sit here and something magical will happen. Things will get better by themselves, and we will just be able to wake up in 20, 40, or 50, and the world will be a much cleaner and greener place, right? And that is a continuing challenge which I think happens across the industry. And why if you deep dive into why does this challenge actually happen? I think there are very complex set of challenges in general around sustainability, around logistics, and of course, very specific to India. Now, on the demand side, I think obviously we have a lot of seasonal demand. I think the earlier panel talked about fulfillment strategies and fulfillment logistics. A lot of seasonal demand, not just because of e-commerce, but just because of the way we have a festival every month, a few big festivals which drive consumption. Demand in India over the last decade has become more omni-channel. especially so after COVID. So it's just much, much harder to forecast demand. I remember I met, I think, Rakesh first 3 years ago or something, 3.5 years ago. And I asked him this question saying, what's the largest problem in supply chain? He said, Ram, there's only one problem. If you can forecast demand perfectly, all other problems will go away. I think that still stays. It's probably going to outlive my time. And of course, now it's become more complex because it's very omni-channel and it's much harder to derive predictability at that level. We are, of course, a country where cost to serve is extremely important. And therefore, the economics of sustainability becomes a real challenge. And from a demand side across different industries, you're challenged or played with high SKU variability and just an increasing, and while tier 2, tier 3 growth is a wonderful thing to talk about in newspapers, in press, in boardrooms, I think since all of you are supply chain professionals, you know it's a lot harder to actually get it done really well. So I think demand side challenges really complicate the way to deliver and embrace right, a whole set of things. I think on the supply side, there's similar challenges. The general tendency is obviously to go green through electrification, through clean energy fuels, and they provide a set of challenges, right? Technology itself is under-evolved. Even today in India, you really can't cross anything more than 4 tons in terms of vehicle payloads to actually. So and as a company, you're running 32 feet double axles and so on. How do you actually kind of manage that transition when technology does not support it? There is a risk of obsolescence, which affects a lot of companies because we are working with technologies which will obsolete themselves. In our own business, and I'll share a little bit later on, I think the first 500 or 600 three-wheeler electric vehicles we bought were 110 cubic feet vehicles. 9 months, a year later, a bunch of companies launched a 140 cubic feet vehicle and then a 170 cubic feet vehicle, and suddenly nobody wants 110. Right, and we're sitting on a few $1 million of investment, which we can't really kind of deploy very well. So obsolescence risk is very high. The Indian logistics industry, as you know, is layered. A lot of it's actually outsourced to service providers, and a lot of service providers struggle to embrace sustainable technologies. If you go to places like Japan or otherwise, you will probably see that the logistics industry itself has just embraced it and embedded a lot more in their operations, and that's a lot harder to do, a lot rarer in our country. Obviously, a lot of infrastructure gaps, which I think all of you have probably read about, charging station networks, your charge anxiety, which is there across companies as you try to build fleets. Challenges if you want to build an LNG fleet or a natural gas fleet in terms of enough filling points, moving economics. And as a result, a lot of the supply side providers just carry risk which nobody is really ready to cover. Right? So there is a risk premium which this evolving ecosystem wants, which very often the demand side doesn't want to bear because they have their own inefficiencies they're dealing with. And therefore, most of the companies which we've worked with, or we work with even today, I mean, really, while they are very excited about the possibilities of sustainability, really struggle with 3 broad things. The first big challenge is how do you ensure business continuity? That how do you ensure that there are things like risk around the anxiety around charging periods, a bit of infrastructure, what if vehicles get stranded, how do you get that the risk de-risked, how do you manage the end of month surges in terms of vehicle availability and so on. The second one is scalability. Everybody is scared about how you can really scale it. So if you want to move on electric vehicles, it's a great idea, but if you want to move it in the Northeast, for example, and you're shipping from a distribution center in Guwahati to the other 7 sisters, how do you actually do this? Right? It's great on a piece of paper, but how do you actually manage it? And of course, given the pressure on economics, it's very difficult for most companies to actually go back and justify a green premium. Right? So a lot of people just do a little bit of stuff here and there just to show that they're making moves, but it's very difficult for people to really find a way to make a step change across the board. Right? What we think works, and I think over the last 3 years, we at Mahindra Logistics have been really trying to work on building a real green logistics portfolio. I think what we've tried to do is really, I think what we have learned from others, and I won't say this is all our own work, what we have learned from the companies which have made great progress is really 5 big things. The first one is develop a clear baseline. It's really hard to do this, right? But if you can actually develop a very, very clear baseline which tells you what your footprint is, it goes back to the survey which you did, what gets measured gets done. If you can actually do that, then that's something which is your starting point in the journey. The second one, of course, is companies which we think are accelerating, have adopted available technologies and chosen to scale them, right? They have not tried to kind of boil the ocean, solve everything, but actually just focused on building roadmaps and moved one step at a time by establishing clear and measurable programs. I think a very important thing is, I think, refining your supply chain design to actually, work on renewable energy. So we do, for example, work with a very large marketplace in the eastern part of India. Probably we work with them on their grocery, it's a grocery marketplace. And we run a network of 5 fulfillment centers and over 120 odd delivery stations for them. All of them are electric, right? All our deliveries in that region are electric. Probably part of India which a lot of people think is very difficult to do. And one of the reasons we've been able to do that is because we have co-created a supply chain design with them. We've actually kind of looked at saying what capacities can the vehicle take, how do we ensure the totes can move well through them, how do we make changes in tech systems, how do you kind of stack orders properly, how do you design beats based on what vehicles can do, right? And refining your supply chain design is actually really important if you want to actually make this work. And lastly, I think you do have to have a view of win-win partnerships. That's not just our customers, but us as well. And we've had to take risks on some of our fleets and make those big moves because we want to do that. I think what we have found consistently, the companies which we have made progress with, and I thought it was more important to share that rather than just give you a sales pitch on what I think should be done. But the companies which we think have actually worked this well or are making progress around this have actually really, I think, taught us these 5 things really well, and we've been trying to kind of adapt to that as a company. So what we have done in MLL, of course, is develop an ecosystem which drives all of that. At the heart of it is an emission analytics and advisory platform. All our trucks and all our trucking across the country is actually on that platform today. And we can actually, on a daily basis, allow you to ping in and check what was the emissions by truck and by consignment of those packages, of those vehicles. And we have 1,200 customers on the platform, clocking in probably more than a few million kilometers a month. And that actually allows us to go with customers and say that if this is your emission performance or your carbon footprint, what can you do to actually optimize it, right? What can we actually do? And some of it is stuff which we do, and some of it is things they can do themselves. They don't actually need us to do it. But they do get access to that, and it's something which we've made a big investment in. It's got a bunch of other tools. It's got artificial intelligence enabled. There's an Gen AI-based bot which allows you to model your platform, model your movements. It allows you to actually move to multiple modes, multiple fuels, and that's kind of the heart of what we've been trying to do. We've actually supported that, of course, with 4 things: sustainable warehousing. We have close to 7 million square feet of sustainable warehousing today. They're all IGBC Platinum or LEED certified. And that network is growing. We've got circularity principles in the way we operate those facilities. A lot of work which we've actually been doing is on low carbon, mid-mile and long haul movements. So these are not necessarily around moving to electric vehicles, which is the most fashionable thing. So a few months ago, we started a program which we call Pro Trucking, which is a very high efficiency network, truck operation, trucking operation, which we run with our own assets. What we've been able to do with that is actually work on redesigning networks for our clients, and that allows you to actually reduce the fuel which you use, right? So you can move from smaller trucks to bigger trucks. You can readapt your fleet, and if you run at a very high level of efficiency with very low detention, great connectivity, you can actually reduce your overall carbon load, right? It's still ICE, and it's still not zero, but it's a whole lot better than where you are. We obviously have developed, we are working on developing some cross-border solutions through our freight forwarding business with some offerings. And of course, we run a very large last mile delivery fleet, which is completely electric. I talked to the emission analytics platform. It's real time. It actually reports shipments across, so it's well to wheel, it just covers the entire supply chain. Not just tailpipe emissions, but all the way back to the well. It is aligned. It's based on GLEC, so actually it's globally capable in terms of, or globally usable in terms of data. complies to a whole set of standards, both in terms of Indian regulatory reporting as well as European regulatory reporting. And we can do a bunch of modeling around how you can actually decarb your business a lot more. And that's something which we actually use today. We use it for internal operations to set our own targets, and we actually make it available for our clients as well. I won't talk much about this. We do a bunch of electric vehicles. We run India's largest electric vehicle-based cargo service. It's close to 2,000 vehicles in more than 24 cities in the country, right? And now it's largely three-wheeler today, but we are expanding now in four-wheelers as well. By the end of this year, we'll actually have payloads up to north of 4 tons. So you can do a lot of fulfillment or DC center, intra-city or intrastate movements with it as well. And I think I talked briefly about our warehousing, which is there across the board as well. So that's been our journey, but I think my view is, I think we keep saying this, that a brighter tomorrow begins with a better today, right? So, and I think sustainability often provides this challenge because everybody signed on to this brighter tomorrow, right? Everyone loves the idea, there's no shortage of it, but I think it requires, the call to action is to make one step every day. It's not a problem where we can actually there is no systemic solution to this. Is doing one thing at a time, right? And so that's a journey which we are on, and I think it's a journey which I can't tell you which more people can get on. You won't solve for it fully, but 3 years ago we could not do, we could not on small pack shipments actually be equivalent between electric and diesel, and today we are. And we can do a CPS which actually is very competitive with vehicle uptime and network reliability, which competes across fuels, and that's something which we think is really capable to do. Of course. But at MLL, we are very committed to be carbon neutral by 2040. It's a journey we are on. It's publicly out there, and one which I'm confident, thanks to a great team which I have, we'll get to hopefully a little bit faster than 2040. So with that, I think those are just some thoughts around what everyone can do to build sustainable supply chains. And I just thank Rakesh and the team for having a chance to have me over, and everyone else at ISCM, and thank you all for your attention. Thank you.